Okay, great. So I'm going to try and get through everything in about half an hour. And as Selena said, if you do have any questions as we're going through, do put them in the chat box. I'd be very happy then to have a discussion about what I'm doing after the talk. So as Selena's already said, I am a biologist, but I have worked for many years now with geophysicists, so particularly Tarja Nissen-Meyer, who for a long time was at Oxford. He's now at the University of Exeter. So I guess it's coming up to 10, 11 years now that we've been at this interface between biology and seismology. So let's go on to the next slide. So the structure of this talk is going to be in 4 parts. I'm going to start off by giving you kind of a biologist view on where animals and seismic vibrations meet. I'll then go through how we might be able to classify animal behavior using seismic vibrations. So I'll introduce the elephants in that section, but also tell you a little bit about some of the other work we're doing, for example, with fiddler crabs. And then I'll go kind of through the 2 core projects that are looking at remote monitoring of wildlife. So I'll go through the Seismic Savannah project that focused on remote monitoring, and then I'll go through our more recent work using stride nodes to study elephant seismic communication. Right, so I wanted to start off with the acknowledgements because I want to make the point up front that although this is me giving this lecture, obviously this is a lot of work from a lot of people. So to explicitly mention Tarja Nissen-Meyer and Andrew Markham, who have been the co-investigators on this project, but also everyone in bold there. So Dan, Alice, Tom, Michael, Alex, and Renee, they have all done kind of first author work that I'm going to present today as well. So thank you to everyone, and it's all a team output. And what you can see from this slide also is kind of the range of funding that's gone into this, piecing together small bits of grants before accessing the larger grants, but also that this is very much a collaboration between the UK and Kenya, as well as departments across computer science, earth science, and biology. So hopefully a nice example of interdisciplinary work. So I'm going to start off by telling you about animal and seismic vibrations. So I usually start off talking about our 5 senses. People tend to be quite human focused when thinking about our senses, but in the animal world, mechanical sensing goes way beyond what we usually think of our own senses. So you may think about touch and hearing, but animals are also making use of detecting their own body movements, are also motions, and of course material-bound vibrations. So whether this is vibrations through silk fibers or whether it's vibrations along the ground, as we'll talk about with elephants, this is all under the umbrella of mechanosensation and is used for biological information by animals. So my research and the research of my group aims to understand how and why animals use mechanical sensing. So my research group uses an integrative approach to understand mechanical senses. So we're interested in not just vibrations through materials, but how does that interface with vibrations through air? What is the difference between touch and hearing and vibration sense? We study diverse organisms at different scales. I'm not going to talk to you about spiders or any of the other animals today, but feel free to ask me if you are interested. And we also explore the applications of this research. So fundamentally, I'm interested in biological questions, but there are potential applied avenues of the work, for example, the conservation monitoring application of our elephant work. So in nature, vibrations are obviously everywhere, and as such, many animals have evolved to be able to detect and respond to vibrations that move along surfaces or through materials. And it's used for lots of things that are important for them, whether it's catching food or finding mates, or it's used in lots of different contexts. So primarily my approach to understanding this sensory mode is trying to move towards bio-inspired engineering. So what can we understand from biological systems that then can inspire how we use sensors for different applications? So broadly speaking, my lab looks at things like, can we build sensors for robotic systems based on the research we've done with spiders in particular? Also interested in remote monitoring, which is obviously the focus of this talk. So whether that's animals, machines, different events as well, but also harnessing the power of vibrations through materials in that you can actively generate vibrations, you can detect echoes that are coming back. So you also are making use of that active sensing with vibrations through materials as well. So just to introduce elephants in this context, which is going to be a big focus of this talk. So I wanted to make clear up front that I'm talking about two different things with elephants that they both do. So the first is that, of course, they are large animals. When they walk around, they are incidentally generating vibrations through the ground. So mini earthquakes are generated when any large mammal moves along the ground, and indeed even small mammals. It's just very different in the range and in the signal to noise ratio. So firstly, I am talking about footfalls that are generated by elephants. They don't generate them purposefully to transmit information. So it's incidentally something that they generate as they're moving around. But secondly, and these elephants also purposefully generate vibrations through the ground when they vocalize. So simply using their vocal cords, because they are so large and such low frequency, when they vocalize, they are able to vibrate the ground. So this is specifically for elephant rumbles. This is one type of elephant vocalization. So I'm not talking about trumpets. I'm not talking about any of those other types of vocalizations, but for an elephant rumble, which tends to have a low frequency component, so contains frequencies under 20 hertz, elephant rumbles are detectable on seismic sensors. So that's a key distinction to make up front, that I'm talking both about incidental footfalls, but also these purposefully generated rumbles that generate both a component that you can measure with a microphone through the air, but also are detectable using seismic sensors in the ground. And we know that if you just play back seismic vibrations to elephants, so no airborne vibration, just vibrate the ground to an elephant, that they detect it and they respond to it. So we call that seismic playback. So we know that they can detect seismic vibrations, and in the absence of an acoustic component, they respond in an appropriate way. So if you play them back an alarm rumble, just through the ground, then they respond in a way that's appropriate for an alarm rumble. So they show vigilant behavior and they group together. So that supports that elephants have seismic communication, that they're transferring information using vibrations through the ground, which doesn't require an acoustic component to be detected. So as I said, the elephants are sensitive to seismic vibrations. I won't go through now in detail specifically how they're sensitive to it, but feel free to ask me if you want to. But essentially, they're thought to be using their middle ear and using bone conduction to the middle ear to detect these vibrations. But this brings us into the first point that I wanted to make in this context, is that it means that seismic noise matters for elephants. So with one experiment that I did in Kenya, we played seismic noise to the elephants and we monitored their behavior. So what we can see is I generated 3 treatments, so the orange, pink, and blue. So in the first treatment, in the orange, we just played back what an elephant rumble would look like. In the pink, we played back just white noise. And then in the blue, we superimposed noise on top of the elephant rumble. And what we were able to show is that the tracks that contained more noise. So the blue contained the most, the pink contained the middle amount. This caused the elephants to leave the site that we were recording them. So it caused them to retreat, and that's usually an indicator of an association of risk. So seismic noise is something that the elephants can detect and something that they're associating with risk. So it means that seismic noise is also something we should be thinking about going forward, what potential impact that could have on wildlife. Yes. Okay, so I'll now go through how we can classify animal behaviors through seismic vibrations. So this was essentially our pilot project for this work in collaboration with Tario and Earth Sciences and Save the Elephants. And the question was really, can we detect different elephant behaviors using seismic recording? And in this case, we used wired geophones. And what we were able to do then, we went out to the fields where the elephants were, we watched what they did, and we recorded that behavior on a geophone. We were then able to deconvolve a source function, so how much force is generated at the source, and then we had a computer model where we were able to input the source functions and look at what effect propagation distance or geology in the computer model had on the propagation of these different types of vibration. And essentially what this showed is comparing something very broad like a vocalization versus a walk, you're able to determine a difference on the seismic sensor of those different behaviors. But furthermore, that the ability to detect and discriminate this is based on distance to the sensor, seismic noise, and geology. So all relatively predictable, but pretty new in this context to look at animal behavior and how we can use seismic sensors. And this was really kind of the start of all the other work then that we ended up doing. So I did want to throw in the fiddler crabs just to show that we do things other than the elephants. So I'm going to play this video now of what I think is a delightful fiddler crab on a beach in Portugal. And what you're hearing is basically the behaviors of their courtship routine. So this is a male crab that's trying very hard to attract females to come and mate with him. You could just hear at the end that he's drumming underground at the end. So essentially during this courtship routine, they're doing different behaviors, drumming the ground, whether it's outside the burrow or inside the burrow as part of their display to the female. So essentially with the fiddler crabs, we also looked at, for the behavior that we can see, can we pick that up on the seismic recording? And again, using wired geophones, we were able to study this in a recently accepted paper, looking at drumming versus body dropping versus non-percussive behaviors. And using supervised machine learning kind of supports that you can use the seismic recording alone to determine what the animal behavior was. We were also able to look at factors such as how does male size, or how does distance away from the male, how does this affect the seismic recording that you get. And the reason that we're doing this is because this is important for understanding the multimodal communication in crabs. So what is the relative role of these components where they're drumming the ground versus the visual parts of their display? So trying to understand how females are integrating all of this information to make decisions about who to mate with. But that just a little showing that this works beyond big animals like elephants as well. So this is the third part of the talk then, and we're going to go through the Seismic Savannah project, which focuses on remote monitoring. So just to introduce the site where we do the majority of our work now. So this is Impala Research Centre, which is in Kenya. And obviously shown by the blue star there is where the Impala Research Centre is. And the aim of the Seismic Savannah project was to test the potential and limitations of seismic wildlife monitoring. So given the data I've already shown you, showing that we can look at a bull rumble versus locomotion, are we able then to use seismometers, so 3 component seismometers that we bury under the ground to assess which animals are present. So here was the team involved back in 2019 to deploy the seismometers into the ground. And essentially around a dam within the research centre where lots of elephants go, we deployed seismometers, which are given by the red triangles, and we put in a bunch of camera traps as well that we could link the wildlife present to the recordings that we were getting on the seismometers. So here's a picture of us putting in the seismometers. So all the solar power and everything going in, and we had to make special cages to go around them to make sure that the rodents, the monkeys, the elephants couldn't interfere with the seismometers whilst they were in the ground. And aside from the site near the dam, we then had the seismometers several kilometres away from this as well, with the idea of looking at propagation of different types of vibrations through this array. So we're talking about a handful of seismometers, so I think it was up to 15 or so for this particular project. So the question was around, can we use seismic vibrations to monitor wildlife? So firstly, thinking about the data we collected, this relied on manual analysis of camera trap images and assigning the camera trap images to particular type of wildlife. So, and as you can see, we got a lot of elephants represented in the camera trap images, a lot of giraffe and humans, and fewer things such as guinea fowl. But we've got a relatively good diversity of different types of animals, but it is an unbalanced data set in terms of we have much more of some types of animals than others. So we use the camera trap tagging to assign the species, behavior, time, and location to the seismic data. And then that resulted in around 8,000 hours of tagged seismic data by this type of information. So then we were interested then in testing, so what is the potential for using this to detect animals, to locate animals, and then also to categorize what type of animal it is. Can we do species? Can we do behavior? So really pushing, when is this going to work? When is it going to be harder? What is the potential here for using seismic data in this way? So in terms of elephant rumbles then, I've got here a spectrogram of the acoustic component of a rumble and a spectrogram of the seismic component of a rumble. And I can play you an audio track, which of that particular spectrogram, just to say that I have amplified the audio track and I have put it up an octave so that you can hear it more clearly, but there is a direct comparison that you can make across the acoustic and the seismic in terms of how I've treated the data, obviously bearing in mind that they are different types of sensors. Right, so here is the audio track then for the acoustic part. Right, so that's an elephant rumble up an octave, detected with a microphone. And this is the seismic component, so detected using the seismometer. So not as impressive in quality, but you can still hear, I kind of, with my students, call it a kind of ghostly moo noise, which is the elephant's seismic component. And obviously you can see immediately from the spectrograms that there's differences in frequency filtering. So you do get a lot less higher frequency content from the seismometer, whereas you get a lot more high frequency content from the acoustic sensor, including these parallel lines, which are these harmonics of the vocalization. So that's obviously explained by the different the different physics of how the vibrations couple and propagate through the ground. So in terms of localizations, the idea essentially is that using the spectrograms then for the rumbles, using the spectrograms from sensors in different locations, you can then triangulate where the source of the rumble is. So here we've got spectrograms from 4 different seismic stations, east, north, west, and south. You're then able to, by looking at the time difference of arrival of the rumble, locate the elephant within that, within the geometry of those 4 sensors together. And we were able to do a seismic and acoustic comparison in this way. So by co-locating the seismometers with the microphones, we can look at the relative accuracy of locating rumbles from seismic and acoustic data. And essentially, they were both pretty good in that they could locate within 10 meters. Of course, if you had a person there, they could probably do better than that. But the idea is, can this be used in the context where we don't have people or cameras there? And in terms of my interest, I was particularly impressed that the seismic recordings are as good or maybe even better than the acoustic recordings. So there doesn't seem to be, it seems to be able to do anything that the acoustic component could do. And this was definitely promising and surprising that you were getting the same amount of information from the seismic recordings that you could from the acoustic components in this context. So the last thing that we aimed to do, other than detection and localization, was classify what has generated the seismic signature. So with this, we use supervised machine learning and good accuracy. I mean by that kind of over 80% correct binary classification. So can it spot an elephant versus a non-elephant according to the tags from the camera trap data? Can it determine elephant locomotion versus elephant rumbling? Can it determine elephant walk versus run? And all of that binary classification, it was able to train and detect. So, of course, it depends on the distance from the sensor. So it becomes very difficult for this to work with the footfalls over 150 meters. It is a lot better if it's something like 50 meters. So that's obviously worth bearing in mind if this is ever something that is deployed for footfalls in the future. And it depends where the data is collected. So in terms of, is this generalizable to different locations? The answer comes down to, it depends how similar those locations are. So it's almost certain that you would need a degree of retraining of any of these models for a different location. But to a certain extent, within the place where we put the different sensors, you were able to have transfer cases of your training data, and it would still be generally good, generally accurate at determining these binary classifications on unseen data from new sensors. So to give some of our more recent analyses on this data, we've recently got accepted a paper for multi-species classification. So essentially, with the footfalls, the size of the animal, the morphology, especially of the animal foot, and the gait of the animal will all affect the footfalls, the footfall seismic signature. So really leveraging all of that for asking whether we can determine different species from each other. And this is something that's pushing me out my comfort zone, but these are second order scattering coefficients based on the spectrograms that we're getting from the footfalls. And essentially the x-axis is representing the mean frequency of the footfall, and the y-axis is representing the temporal pattern. So using the second order scattering coefficients, then we can basically have a seismic fingerprint of the different types of footfalls that are generated by different animals. So here you've got one for zebra, warthog, giraffe, elephant. And with analysis of this then, René has able to show good accuracy, over 80% for elephant, giraffe, hyena, and zebra, which had sufficient data in order to run this analysis, and that was at 50 meters, but you still had over 70% accuracy at 150 meters. And he also looked at transfer training and whether this was generalizable. And essentially it works pretty well for the elephant and giraffe, again, because we have higher training data for that. So I am aware of time running away from me, but to wrap up this section, essentially what this showed in total is that there is potential for detection, categorization, and localization of wildlife from seismic sources. It's more likely to work if it's a large source or if you have your sensors closer to the source. So thinking towards having more sensors that are closer together. And obviously environmental variability has an effect as well. So obviously this is a step forward compared to the last step, the last project I presented, but what we're doing with the next project I'm going to talk to you about is we move to a very, very dense array using the stride sensors. So let's have a look then at this multi-sensory array. So this project then starts to move to answer biological questions about why do elephants use seismic communication? So given what I've told you about the evidence that they respond to seismic vibrations alone, that rumbles generate a seismic component, why do they do that? Is there any benefit to the seismic component, or is it a physical accident? Is it just the biomechanics of them vocalizing that they happen to make a component through the ground? So I'll show you some evidence here for whether the seismic and acoustic components differ in information content. Right, so in this deployment then, again at Impala, we used an ultra-dense array. And what I mean by that is 50-meter spacing of 1,220 stride nodes that were in a 1 by 4 kilometer array. We co-located these with acoustic sensors. So the stride nodes are given by the red circles, the white circles give the acoustic sensors. So the acoustic sensors were separated by 250 meters. So we had about 56 of those. And then again, we had camera traps that were deployed around the dam to give us that ground truthing of which animals are present, particularly the elephants. And what we were aiming to work towards this with such a large data set, combining both acoustic and seismic sensors in a dense array, is working towards automated detection, localization, and contouring of the rumbles, and having a data set for seismic and acoustic comparison of the rumbles. And out of this, we're hoping to answer what are the relative propagation distances of the seismic and acoustic components of rumbles, and what effect does environment have on both of these components. So this was a lot of work over 4 months that the team were in Impala deploying all of these nodes. One of the big issues was once we had buried the nodes, being able to find them again. The team managed to do very well. And in the end, we only lost 1 node out of 1,220. And I think Mike is on the call, and I might have told him we lost more than that, but effectively we found some. We found some even years later back in this location. To move on to the results then, what I'm showing in this diagram here is in orange, we have over time the amplitude that's picked up on the acoustic sensors. So the orange then is from the acoustic array where we have fewer numbers of sensors. And in the purple below, this is the amplitude that we pick up over time for the dense seismic array. And since we have so many more sensors in the seismic array, we've got a lot more information that's picked up. So focusing on the left, we have a picture of a lion at the top. This is because this is what's picked up from a lion roar within the array. So on the purple in particular, you can see these beautiful concentric circles that spread out over time. And we've actually got two different lions that are roaring in this. So you can see one has an epicenter towards the kind of bottom left, and another one is outside the array, more towards the center, but over to the right. So you're picking up the propagation of these lion roars, both acoustically and seismically across the array. On the right there, we've got the same information from an elephant rumble. So actually a lot less easy to distinguish in terms of the concentric circles, but we're still able to look at how both the acoustic and seismic sensors pick up these animal-generated vocalizations over time. And overall, they indicate that we have air-ground coupling. So if you compare the speeds and the synchronization between the acoustic and seismic sensors, they are picking up at exactly the same time, which is indicating a similar propagation speed. So we therefore think we're picking up the acoustic wave with these seismic nodes. And watch this space for, we're putting a lot of time into analysis of this data, and we're hoping to show information on propagation distances of different types of sources, especially elephant rumbles, and the effect of environment as well. So we've also generated an automated rumble detector. So we have a separate one for seismic and acoustic data. It relies on a degree of manual labeling of the data first, but then we have a trained supervised machine learning model that's then able to detect rumbles from non-rumbles. And this detector can then be used to run on a time series of our data to expand our labeled data set, so we can automatically detect rumbles in our data. And we also have automated rumble contouring, which I'm very excited about. So essentially for the rumbles that we've detected, either manually or through our automated detector, we can use another machine learning algorithm to denoise the data. And effectively, we've got the labeled contours here in the rainbow colors. We're basically being, from the spectrogram, able to take out the frequencies, the shape, the time components, and the formats, so those parallel lines, the harmonics within the vocalization. So we've got this automatic way of extracting all of this useful information from the rumbles that we're detecting. So the question was around why do elephants use seismic communication, and we've got a paper in preparation from my DPhil student Tom, who's looked at pairs of seismic sensors. So if you've got a seismic sensor that is different distances or different orientations from a source, you're comparing two seismic sensors, and doing the same with two acoustic sensors. So you would expect generally those pairs to be the same if it's from the same rumble or the same source. But he's comparing that then, where if instead you have a pair of seismic and acoustic data. So for the same rumble, you've got something detected from a seismic sensor, something from the acoustic sensor. And he's then statistically comparing these types of true pairs to false pairings, where they're not from the same source. You've got random pairings of acoustic, or two seismic, or false pairings of acoustic and seismic. And he's basically looking at the different shapes. So the question that he wants to answer then is, do seismic and acoustic components of rumbles have redundant information content? So again, watch this space for the answer to that question. So to conclude this talk then, it was, can we remotely monitor wildlife using seismic sensors? The take-home messages from this is, firstly, I hope that you appreciate that many animals generate, detect and respond to seismic vibrations. Secondly, we can use seismic sensors, whether it was the wired geophones, the broadbands, or the stride nodes, to help determine animal species, which species are present, but perhaps also their behavior, whether it's vocalization or walking or running, for example. The elephants are fascinating in this context because they generate seismic vibrations on purpose to communicate through these rumble vocalizations, but they also incidentally generate seismic vibrations as they move around. And that machine learning is really helping us use these big data sets, these ultra-dense multisensory arrays, to learn more about elephant communication on the one hand, but also how we can remotely monitor wildlife by eavesdropping on these seismic vibrations. And with that, I will acknowledge again, all of my collaborators couldn't have put this talk together without the contribution of all these people, and of course my lovely funders as well. So with that, I'll thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.